Hi everyone, today I'm going to be doing the spoiler book tag. This is the first time I've done a tag in a really long time, so this should be fun. I got tagged for this by Book Binge, whose channel I've been really enjoying lately. You guys should definitely check her out. I'll link to her video as well as to the original tag down below. I just want to note today is the first day I've set up completely by myself, including audio. So if the audio is a mess today, my husband didn't set it up for me, so you guys know who's to blame. I was so happy to get tagged for this, and this is also going to be a really funny tag for me because what you guys might not know about me is that I'm actually a spoiler addict. When I was a kid, anytime I was reading a book, at some point I would flip to the very end and read the last page or the last paragraph or whatever. I would always just check to see how it ended. Also, I've always done stuff like when I was a preteen and I was reading A Song of Ice and Fire for the first time, I figured out pretty quickly that because all the chapters are titled as the point of view characters, if I wanted to know if somebody was really dead or if it was just a cliffhanger, I would just flip ahead and see if their point of view came up again in that book. And that was a good way to know if they were dead or not. So my whole life, I have been pretty active about pursuing finding out spoilers, which is the opposite of a lot of people that like to avoid spoilers. The thing that finally broke me of my lifelong reading ahead habit was that when I was in college, I switched over to reading mostly on Kindle instead of mostly physical books because I didn't have a lot of space in my dorm room. And at that point, and in those days, it was a lot more inconvenient to jump around in Kindle compared to a physical book. So that basically stopped me from reading the ending to things, and I mostly broke the habit. I don't really do that anymore. I have still looked up to see how things ended occasionally. I'm also totally that person that I read the synopses to TV shows I'm never gonna watch on Wikipedia. You know, I'm just a spoiler addict, so I think this is gonna be a fun tag. So here we go. Question 1. What do you consider a spoiler? That's kind of tough for me because, like I said, I kind of like spoilers. So I think I actually go the other way when I'm thinking about what I consider to be a spoiler. I try to be really considerate so that I'm not accidentally a jerk about it. So I'd probably go maybe a little overboard in terms of what I consider to be a spoiler, just because I really don't want to spoil anybody's experience. You know, if they happen to be one of those oversensitive types that doesn't want to know what happens. So anyway, I think for me, I definitely consider things that are in the marketing for a book or on the cover copy, those are definitely not spoilers. And in general, I kind of consider what happens in the first chapter to not really be a spoiler, but if it's something really twisty or something, you know, depending on how the story goes, I might only talk about things that happen at the beginning of the story in vague terms if they are kind of a twist. So that just really depends book to book. But in general, I consider pretty much everything that's not on the back cover or the marketing to be a spoiler, but I still feel like you have to be able to talk about something. So I'll feel okay mentioning sort of the setup for a book, which I generally would say is probably the first chapter. Question 2. Does the genre you're reading impact what you consider to be a spoiler? I don't know. To me, not really. I think the age of the book probably impacts that to some extent. So given that, I probably wouldn't worry about spoiling classics as much as things that were written in the last few years. But I also feel like within that, like Lord of the Rings, which is fantasy and is also kind of classic fantasy, if you don't know how Lord of the Rings ends, you know, I'm not really going to worry about that. And anything, I guess I would just consider things that are really well known, have been out for a while, or just are very popular. I'm less worried about spoiling, but that's not really a genre thing. That's sort of an age and popularity thing. Question 3. Sometimes a synopsis can be too detailed. Do you research books prior to reading them, or do you prefer to know nothing about the book? Weirdly, this one kind of depends on my mood more than anything else. I don't think I have a standard approach. I've had times where I just went in and didn't even read the cover copy for a book. I don't know why. Usually that would be an ebook that I got from the library, of course, because if you're holding the physical book, it's hard not to read the back. But yeah, I think I've definitely done that. There have been times where I've read reviews, looked up information about the book. I think it just kind of depends what the book is, how I'm feeling about it, how curious I am, or if I want to be surprised. So that really just depends on the individual book and also just my mood that day. Question 4. Sometimes the introduction or translator's notes can spoil the ending, especially for a classic. Has this ever happened to you? You know, I think it probably has. but I can't really think of an example, and it doesn't really bother me. Like I said, I love spoilers. If I'm going to read a classic, I've probably read the synopsis on Wikipedia or somewhere else before. You know, that's just the kind of thing I will do for fun anyway. Or if I haven't, if I'm going to read something really well known, honestly, I might just read the entire synopsis beforehand. I don't feel like those kinds of stories are usually stories that suffer from knowing more information. So yeah, but I don't necessarily read introductions or translators notes, especially if they're long, but I have read them before. It just, again, kind of depends on my mood. Question 5. Name a time somebody spoiled a novel for you. Well, if we're not counting the infinite books that I've spoiled for myself, which we probably should count, so I've done that a lot, and there have definitely been times where I read the ending to something when I was younger and was just so crushed or disappointed. But then, you know, usually I would keep reading, and by the time I actually got to that ending, I'd be okay with it and realize that that's how the book should end. I'm sure there are cases where it was just a bad ending, but other times I think that's really what taught me that it doesn't really matter how a book ends. It's just about how you get there and whether the author convinces you that that's how it should have ended. But I do have a pretty good spoiler story, and this is going to spoil the ending of the 6th Harry Potter book if for some reason you haven't read that. I feel like this fits into that previous question about, you know, genre and things, what counts as a spoiler. To me, Harry Potter, anything, you know, something that's been so popular, that does not count as a spoiler to me. But so I was at summer camp. I was 15 or 16, probably I think 15 still, when Harry Potter 6 came out. Anyway, I was away at camp. This was still relatively early days of Amazon, so a bunch of people had actually thought to pre-order their books to them at camp. Luckily, my parents live relatively nearby. I hadn't thought to do that, so I'd ordered mine to my parents, so they were coming the next day and they brought me my copy. Other kids were about a day ahead of me by the time I got the book. Luckily, I'm a very fast reader and I still finished before most of them. But at this camp, after meals would be the time where people would stand up and make announcements and things like that about what was going on, especially after lunch. It would sort of be, you know, the announcements for the day's afternoon activities. So this one boy stands up and just says, "Dumbledore dies." And of course, people were really mad at him and all this. And to be honest, I didn't even really believe it until I got there in the book. And maybe that just shows how immune to spoilers I was. I was just kind of like, I mean, and this was a kid that would probably have been messing with people, but he probably just skipped to the end anyway. But anyway, so he just stood up and spoiled the ending for the 6th Harry Potter book, which I did get to later that night. And yeah, that was a rough ending. And I would say I was just as emotionally impacted when I read the end of the book as I would have been if I hadn't heard that spoiler, but that still stands in my memory as probably just the most infuriating and memorable occasion of being spoiled for a book by somebody. Question 7. Have you ever spoiled a novel for somebody else? I try to be really good about this and not do it. I feel like there have definitely been times in my videos where I've forgotten to give a spoiler warning or something when I talk about something just randomly. So if I've ever spoiled anything for you, I'm sorry. I try not to do it. Other than that, I think mostly it has pretty much been when I've been talking about a book to somebody and they say, "You know what, I'm never going to read this. Why don't you tell me how it ends?" Other than that, I don't think I have. I can't think of an occasion where I spoiled something that somebody really didn't want to know and, you know, they got upset or anything like that. I've tried to be a good citizen in this regard because, like I said, I know my own tendencies and I just try to be thoughtful and considerate and know that other people are not like me. But yeah, just as an example, my best friend just read a memory called Empire and she liked it okay, but it just wasn't really for her. But she was still kind of curious what happened in A Desolation Called Peace. So she did watch my spoiler discussion video, but also I kind of told her just a few things by text that happened in the book because she wanted to know certain things. And so yeah, I spoiled things like that where I was just basically saving somebody the trouble of reading something that they weren't planning to read. Question 7. If spoilers ruin novels, all right, I told you guys I have trouble with that word, ruin. If spoilers ruin novels, are there some authors or genres you can't reread? I feel like this is a problem I've actually had more often with movies because when movies have like a real twist or reveal, a lot of times you feel like something has been a little bit more deliberately kept from you in a way that's a lot harder to pull off in writing. So I can think of a few examples. There's a Chinese movie, The House of Flying Daggers. Spoilers, at the end of that movie, basically nobody is who they seem to be, which basically is, it's dramatic when it happens, but then you realize everything you just watched didn't really happen. So stuff like that, things like that in movies, that will definitely make me not really want to rewatch a movie. So anything like that, I guess there might be books like that too. Anything where the entire plot depends on the reveal, yeah, I feel like that could kind of damage the rereading pleasure. But since I don't really mind spoilers, I'm pretty happy to reread things where I know what happens. I guess there are mysteries, like Agatha Christie, kind of whodunit style, where, yeah, it's not as much fun if you know the answer, but on the other hand, the really good ones are still fun, even if you know who done it. And I've been rereading the Dorothy Sayers, Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries, which have been kind of a mixed bag. I'm not enjoying them as much as I did in college, but I was pretty sure I didn't remember the answers to the mysteries. But with the first few, I'd say the first three, somewhere about halfway through the book, I would always remember how it ended, and that did definitely kind of dampen my reading pleasure. So yeah, I would say mysteries are probably the genre where this is the most of a problem. And other than that, probably just movies that are messing with the information that they're giving you to the point where nothing you're really seeing is actually the truth. Now, that can also be done in kind of an interesting way in a sort of Rashomon story. Hero, I think, another Chinese movie, that's an example of that too, where you get the same story 3 different ways, and then it turns out actually none of those things actually happened. But that's a movie about perspective, kind of like these different contrasting narratives. So also it's pretty much just a visual movie. The plot is not super important. But in my opinion, if a book is only good because of the twist, it's usually not that good a book. There should be something. I'm a rereader, so I think a really good book, it should have something in it that makes you want to reread it, even if it's heavily twist dependent. And sometimes it's really fun if everything is leading up to a certain twist or reveal and it's well done. You're going to really enjoy rereading it, and you're going to see all the ways that the author built to that you couldn't appreciate the first time because you didn't know what the twist was. Question 8. When reviewing, are you spoiler free? Does this limit your ability to discuss? I'm totally a combination. I would say I am mostly spoiler free, and the kinds of things I talk about in books tend to be pretty easy to talk about without spoilers. This is definitely the easiest when I'm talking about either standalones or the first book in series. Where I kind of run into trouble is reviewing later books in a series where I still want to be spoiler free, but it's kind of hard to even do the setup for book 2 without spoiling book 1. So in those cases, usually I'll try to do a completely spoiler-free section, and then I'll do some spoilers at the end for book 1 or even for the book I'm currently reviewing. I usually try to be pretty clear about those, but I actually find I'm usually able to talk about the most interesting things without giving any spoilers for a book. I don't tend to talk about a lot of plot details or anything like that when I talk about books. It's usually a little bit more bigger picture. I'll talk about my reactions. I'll talk about what I felt like worked and didn't work. So I think my reviews are pretty spoiler-free. I'd like to figure out how to do more spoilery discussion type videos. I did one recently on a Desolation Called Peace with my husband, and that was really fun because we had both recently finished the book and we kind of discussed it together. I'd like to kind of get into doing more of that sort of thing for spoilers, but otherwise I pretty much try to stay spoiler-free unless, for example, when I reviewed Empire of Gold, 3rd book in the Daevabad trilogy last summer, I did a completely spoiler-free section. I did a section that had spoilers for the first 2 books in the series, but not Empire of Gold. And then I did a complete spoiler section. So that just kind of gets complicated to film. So it just depends on the book. But if it's something like that, I've been anticipating the book for years, yeah, I'll probably need to put a spoiler section in there because I just have too much to say. But in general, I want my reviews to be useful for as many people as possible. So to me, that means having as little spoilers as I can get away with and still have it be a functional review of some sort. Finally, we're supposed to shout out and then tag some channels. I've always been too shy to tag anybody in tags because I don't know who's done tags, and I don't know, I'm just kind of shy and awkward like that. I'm coming up on my first BookTube birthday. Maybe once I pass 1 year old on BookTube, I'll get brave enough to tag people. But I'll just mention some channels that I enjoy watching in case you guys want to check them out. And this is not a tag. Consider yourself tagged if you want to be tagged, and do not consider yourself tagged if you do not want to be tagged. So a channel I discovered recently is Bookborn. I've really been enjoying her videos. She has a lot of great Cosmere content as well. I've really enjoyed a bunch of her videos recently. I've also been watching a lot of reviews from Books with Brittany. I really enjoy her perspective on things, and I've just been finding myself really agreeing with a lot of things that she's had to say recently. The Library of Alexandria is hilarious. His videos always entertain me and make me laugh, and he has all sorts of fun things in his videos as well as doing really good reviews. Thanks so much for watching. You guys have now heard all my confessions about my issues with spoilers, my spoiler addiction problems, so to speak. This might actually be a fun thing to make another video about sometime in the future, because I feel like I'm really an outlier here and it's kind of funny. But hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you want to see more of my videos, and have a great day.